Hi everyone! Today I'm going to tell you about Ivan Petrovich Pavlov. He's more widely known as that guy who discovered classical conditioning. You know that experiment done with the dogs drooling when the smell of food is presented? Yep, that's him. But let's start at the very beginning. Pavlov was born in 1849 in a town called Ryazan. It's next door neighbors with Moscow. No, not the one up north, the one in Russia. His father was a teacher of the Greek and Latin languages and a priest. He also had two uncles, a grandfather and a godfather who were all priests. His godfather was a lifelong influence on him and encouraged him to become a priest as well. However, at 21 years old, Pavlov decided he didn't want to go into the family business and switched over from the Ryazan Theological Seminary over to the Military Medical Academy in St. Petersburg. He was such an incredible student that the academy allowed him to become a director of a small lab where he helped other students get their doctorates even before he got his own in 1883. Then he continued on to Germany where he studied physiology for 2 years. During this time, he worked under Carl Ludwig, whose positivism had a lasting impact on him. After his 2 years were up, he returned to Russia, and he worked several ill-paying jobs until 1890 when he got the gig to be a professor of physiology at his alma mater, St. Petersburg Military Medical Academy. Here he focused mainly on the digestive system and performed many experimental medical procedures on dogs. With these procedures, he discovered the conditioned reflex, or a learned reflex, because he was able to witness the secretion of gastric juices in response to substances such as meat powder. This research landed him a Nobel Prize on December 12, 1904, and influenced his later work. This is what caused him to stumble over the line into psychology, even though he originally had a low opinion of the subject. His work with conditioned reflex would continue for 30 more years. In his lab, he allowed both women and Jews to study under him, which was very uncommon for the time. What he didn't tolerate was mentalism, and if anyone used it to describe their findings, he would fine them. Though it might seem now that he was kind of a rough individual, this personality type did not carry over into his personal life. His friends were all fond of him, and he loved his wife. In fact, when they were dating, he'd buy her candy, theater tickets, and even a pair of shoes for a trip. However, when she opened her suitcase on the other end, she found only one shoe and a note from Pavlov that read, "Don't look for your other shoe. I took it as a remembrance of you and have put it on my desk." Even though they lived in poverty for the beginnings of their marriage, and Pavlov spent a lot more time working than with his wife, she still supported him as long as he spent time alone with her on the weekends. He obliged. But while he was at work, he discovered the unconditioned reflex, or an unlearned reflex. This is when dogs started salivating before the food powder when they heard the sounds of the server's footsteps. He coined the food powder as an unconditioned stimuli and the drooling as an unconditioned response. This makes the sound of the footsteps a conditioned stimulus, and the drooling then becomes a conditioned response. Now, if you were to take these stimuli away, the behavior would, according to Pavlov, become extinct. But if you then brought them back, the responses would return as well, and Pavlov referred to this as spontaneous recovery. Sometimes the spontaneous recovery could be brought on by something called disinhibition. For example, a loud noise could trigger those extinct responses. He continued pushing this experiment with something he referred to as experimental neurosis. This is when he would condition a dog to recognize a circle as not related to food so it would stop drooling. Then he'd introduce the food stimuli and the circle at the same time. This caused the dog's behavior to become very confused. Some would even become violent and irritable while others became timid and depressed. Because of this, Pavlov thought that there were 4 types of animals: very violent, moderately violent, very inhibited, and moderately inhibited. Further, he referred to the conditioned responses as first signal system, and the unconditioned response as a second signal system. After all of this, Pavlov finally made the connection of his work to psychology, and he wasn't disappointed before dying in 1936 of pneumonia. He is now worldly renowned for his contributions. This has been a life sketch of Ivan Pavlov. Thanks for watching.